So we've been getting a little bit of a drip feed for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We got news about map size, minigames, basic features, a whole Gaelic revolution over Kate Sith's name not being pronounced in the traditional way, and some gameplay builds that have been floating around at conventions. And with the Game Awards only being about a month away coming mid-December, I'm sure we're going to get another big trailer drop there with some big reveals. And with that, I have 5 main questions that I've kind of been wondering about for a little while now, and some hopes and general concerns. My first main question is, what's up with all these timelines, or multiverses, or split memories, or whatever the heck they're calling these things? It seems like there's a sacred timeline that the Arbiter of Fate and the Whispers were trying to protect and make sure things went that way. But with those guys now gone, sort of, it seems like some characters do have full memory of the original sacred timeline, and some characters have ideas of what's going on while others are just getting confusing visions.
What the hell did I just see?
A glimpse of tomorrow if we fail here today.
But I'm kind of wondering how many of these things are there. We've got the original or sacred timeline that the Arbiter of Fate was trying to make sure things happen the exact same way of, that Sephiroth is fully aware of and trying to change, and Aerith seems to have some knowledge of. We've got the remake timeline, which Sephiroth was trying to actively alter, and now that we've destroyed the Arbiter of Fate, some events have been pushed forward like Deep Ground, and we're just going to continue on in that timeline, it seems. And because of the events in the remake timeline, we now have Zack's timeline, where he lives due to Cloud's, I guess, wish. And it seems like in this timeline everyone died from what I assume is the plate falling. And this seems to be a timeline where Sephiroth was actively allowed to change things. There was no Arbiter of Fate. The only reason I'm guessing that is it showed a black feather, which is usually his calling card. This sets us up with, what, 3 timelines? The remake timeline, Zack's timeline, and the original timeline, but part of me thinks they might throw in another one somewhere where someone's interfered further in the past. Only reason I say this is because things change a lot in Zack's timeline, although I guess if it's affecting Zack's timeline, it would have happened in his timeline. This stuff always gets confusing, and I'm sure this is kind of by design so they can get some discourse going around it, but either way, I'm looking forward to getting some answers around these timelines and nailing that down. The second main thing I'm wondering about is Ever Crisis and the First Soldier. For those of you who don't know, Ever Crisis is a mobile game that has 3 story modes in it: OG Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core, and the First Soldier. But the First Soldier is a whole new story, and this story focuses around a pre-soldier group led by Glenn, who gives us a tease early on that he attacks Sephiroth at some point in his future, and while the story is not fully out yet and fully released, it does give a lot more context around Sephiroth's past, introducing him as a soldier and him being the first enhanced soldier, joining Glenn's team. And while most of the characters in this story do look kind of bland and boring, which a couple of them kind of are, Glenn is actually somewhat interesting, at least to me anyways, and there's a lot of buzz around him being possibly this hooded man that we see in the latest trailer. If he is or not, we don't really have any factual evidence leaning one way or the other. I do kind of think it probably is, but at this point it really could be anyone. But what's interesting to me here is that Remake is trying to be an amalgamation of all the Final Fantasy VII related content. They've brought in some of the Deep Ground elements, they're bringing in Crisis Core elements with Zack being alive, and they've even mentioned Advent Children will tie in some way eventually. It's not unreasonable to assume some of this Ever Crisis stuff might fold in as well. And that's kind of my question: are they going to bring in some of this First Soldier Ever Crisis related incidents, or are they just going to be a simple reference? Glenn does seem to have some type of interesting relationship with Sephiroth, and he's probably going to have an odd relationship with Shinra, especially since it seems like the proto-soldiers are going to be thrown away for the new enhanced ones. Possibly they even got the Zack treatment. So this is a bit of a leap in a tinfoil hat theory, but I still think the third game is going to have a 2-party system where we have Cloud's group and Zack's group, and I could pretty easily see Glenn joining Zack's group. But I think either way, I can see some of this First Soldier stuff at least being mentioned or referenced some way in Rebirth, but that does give me some fears and concerns that I'll talk about later on in this video. For my third question, this one kind of focuses more around materia, more specifically summons. There was like a week or so where there was a lot of discourse around summons and how they work and function in the world. Now in Remake, we only see summons by a Chadley, who I still don't really trust, but he basically has us fight simulations of each summon and gives us the materia eventually to summon them, but he lets us know that these aren't the true beings and only fractional copies of their power. The devs have also gone on to mention that in the main world we might actually find some of these summonable creatures running around protecting ancient ruins or guarding objects of importance. I'm guessing we might fight these as bosses throughout the game. Chadley will record the battle data for us and then make a summoning materia for us, like going into an ocean cave and fighting Leviathan, then afterwards speaking to him and him giving us a materia to then summon Leviathan. But because of this change of how summons work, I'm wondering if they're going to start being more important and significant this time around to the overall story. I have a bit of a tinfoil hat theory right now that suggests maybe that these summons might be another way of stopping or sealing away Jenova and Sephiroth. I might down the line make another video on that topic, but I'm thinking summons and maybe some specific knights may be a way to stop Meteor and Jenova without the use of a certain spell. Which that kind of rolls into my next question of when exactly will this game end? I swear for the life of me that I saw a roadmap during the Tokyo Game Show that showed Remake and Rebirth and where each character is met throughout the story and kind of painted a whole map and picture of the overall plan they had, but I can't find it. But either way, Nomura did mention that this game will end in the Forgotten Capital, aka City of the Ancients. And while Nomura does like to troll sometimes, this does sound right and is kind of around where I figured it would end. We might get some more cutscenes that take place after, but yeah, I think the general gameplay is going to end around City of the Ancients. I'm definitely not the first person to say this, but I do feel like this game is going to be the Empire Strikes Back of this game trilogy, which for those who never watched Star Trek means that this game is going to end on a bad note where the heroes are on their back foot and it seems like all hope is lost. I actually don't mind endings like this, but I know a bunch of nerds will get in a fuss over the ending being on a cliffhanger and saying how the ending's not satisfying, just like how they're going to get mad that I said Star Trek instead of Star Wars, but sometimes it's fun watching people stew. But yeah, endings like this mean that there's going to be a lot of discussion around how they're going to come back and cause a lot of discourse, and that is going to keep us talking about this game for many years until the third installment finally comes out. And of course, my final question that I've been thinking about is, will the scene happen? Without getting into spoilers too much, there's a very big event that happens in the City of the Ancients, where everyone likes and subscribes to this channel, and I think similar to how they added a ton of flair and extras to us escaping Midgar and Remake, I have no doubt that they're going to add a ton of stuff here and draw these events out a little bit, adding crazy cinematics, moments, and fights. This will also probably be like the last game, where a lot of things start happening differently, and big plot points will be moved, and the directions of where they're going will finally be revealed. I personally still do think the big scene is going to happen, but in a very different way, which I actually discuss here in this video, but I think they're going to probably trick us into thinking it won't happen, and then all of a sudden...
Bam! There you have it like that, alright?
But no matter which direction it does go, I'll be excited either way, and I think this is kind of the big question that everyone has around this game. With those questions out of the way, there's a handful of things that I'm really excited and hopeful to see in this game. One is the exploration. Final Fantasy VII Remake really lacked exploration, and from the demo footage so far, it does seem like the world map is kind of huge, but I just hope it's dense and utilizes space really well. Final Fantasy XVI has some good sized maps, but it had no real reason to explore them out of mediocre side quests, and hopefully Final Fantasy VII has more fleshed out side quests with longer and unique challenging hunts and lots of hidden little things like fun materials, abilities, weapons, heck even skins, and of course Pokemon cards that we can find for our minigame. And speaking of the minigames, a lot of these look really fun so far. It's kind of reminding me of the Yakuza Like a Dragon series where they just cram in tons of minigames. I mean, have you seen the trailer for Infinite Wealth? They have frickin' Animal Crossing as a minigame in there. And all these extra minigames are just really fun elements that help you get lost into the game even more, and I'm just hoping this element is really strong and that Chocobo Racing just isn't one or two tracks, and Queen's Gambit has a bit of a depth and challenge to it, and one thing I'm wondering is, where's Fort Condor? That game was way too fun and well designed to just show up in a Yuffie DLC and be gone forever. I'm also hoping the combat has evolved in a good way. I really enjoyed the combat in Remake, but it did feel like it was very a base level system and that layers could be added onto it. We're already seeing a little bit of addition with the team-up attacks that are coming in, but I'm hoping there's a little bit more of a challenge outside of just removing item usage like they did in hard mode, because things like that just kind of force you to play in certain ways, like relying on the prey and chakra materias, and I just want to see a diversity of play styles, and I think having a lot of good optional technical fights at the end can be really exciting, but I just don't want to have to be pigeonholed into very specific styles and specific loadouts for these. And the main thing I'm hoping that they continue to do is something that they did in Remake, where they're kind of making these characters that we're getting introduced to more fresh and updating them a little bit. I think Barrett's a really good example of how they did this, and I'm really hoping they continue to do this with Sid and Vincent. I don't want to just see them being, you know, gothy emo guy and angry chain-smoking pilot man. I want them to have a little bit more depth into them. And hopefully we do see some fresh faces as well. I mean, it seems like we have a new member of the Turks, which is fun.
She may be new, but she's still a Turk.
And I also hope Roche makes a comeback. I mean, he was really fun to fight again.
You turned the key.
What I'm actually really hoping for is that we're going to have another fight with him, but we'll be in the tiny Bronco this time, fighting him on his motorcycle. He was also a Fort Condor master, so hopefully we see him again in that aspect, and I'm pretty sure he's going to be in this motorcycle minigame in some way, shape, or form. I'm also hoping the introduction of some of the more controversial characters is well done and they kind of escape some of the cringy and edgy 2000s writing that they were cursed with. which is kind of where some of my concerns are happening, is that they won't properly evolve these characters. And I know it's a little weird that I'm saying I'm hopeful about Sid and Vincent changing a little bit, but I'm concerned about these other characters. But hear me out. When it comes to Zack, for example, I feel like he could use a healthy dose of maturity mixed into his character, which is pretty different from what we've seen from him before. Because when you sit down and think about it, this guy has been through, well, a lot. He had to kill his friend and master, he had to watch his two co-workers, idols, arguably even friends, turn into madness. He was used in an experiment along with Cloud, who he eventually saved and dragged Cloud's unconscious comatose body all the way across Gaia, only to get shot down by the company he devoted his life to. And now that he's survived that fate through Cloud's wish, he's also discovering that Aerith is now gone, and everything's gone to hell in a handbasket, with the plate falling and everything being a disaster around him. I know it's a little bit of a cheesy trope, but I want Zack to feel like a seasoned soldier who has overcome tons of hardship in his life, but still remains to have a positive outlook and is very hopeful despite all of these things. I just don't want him to be the same energetic, happy-go-lucky Zack the puppy that he was in Crisis Core. I want to see him grow a little bit.
Zack the puppy.
And since most likely the sequel is going to end on a dark page, I kind of want him to be that light at the end of the tunnel that kind of brings the rest of the team up and helps them carry on. My other concern, though, with Zack being tied into the story through all these weird timelines, I'm worried we're going to get lost in the plot a little bit. And what I mean by that is the original Final Fantasy VII, while being a sci-fi fantasy, was kind of grounded, even though it was about a guy with beautiful hair trying to blow up the world for his mother. And I'm just worried with some of these new elements, the gameplay story might get lost and the focus might become a little bit of a mess. Timelines and plot devices of this nature can get sloppy and sometimes lead to just really lazy writing and, quite frankly, bad storytelling. It can be a really fine line to walk on. And I'm worried now with all these new elements coming in, the story might start to get a little too convoluted, like some other franchises from Square Enix. And when these things get a little too convoluted, it can make the stakes not matter, the writing can just become silly, or character motivations can just become questionable, and the overall goal can just seem strange. We had a little bit of that with the Whispers in the last game, and we all thought the Whispers were gone, although it seems like they might not be completely gone. And while these timelines have given us Zack, and I'm excited to see how he's going to play a role in the greater picture of everything, the introduction of these timelines do make me concerned about two big things, or more so, two characters specifically. The first of these two characters is, of course, Genesis. I do believe he is going to be coming, and he is going to play a big role in the story in some way, shape, or form. I have a personal theory of how he's going to come in, which I mentioned in this video, but I do agree it is a little bit of a leap, but I kind of stand by it right now. But with that said, if they do not update his character in a meaningful way, it's going to be very problematic, as he's very much hated. If he's going to be running around quoting Lovelets the whole time and being strange and very eccentric the whole time, I think people are just not going to like it. He can keep a little bit of that quirkiness because that is kind of a defining feature of his character, but I want him to be this like holy crusader type where he believes everything he does is because of a just cause because he's been blessed by the planet now. He can still drop some poetic bars on us, even though it might be a little bit annoying, but as long as it's not overbearing, it should be okay. But I think with him functioning as some type of hero of the planet that he's been blessed by,
The world needs a new hero.
he believes everything he does is just and this holy purpose that he's been given, and sometimes it'll cause him to help us and sometimes it'll cause him to get in our way. It could just be really interesting. That said, he's a super controversial character that a lot of folks just really don't like and don't want him anywhere near Final Fantasy VII, but I think if you want to roll him in, just like the timelines, it can be a really tough balancing act, and I just hope they do it correctly.
You'll destroy this place.
That's no way to talk to a hero!
But this might be my biggest concern and fear, aside from the game being just bad overall and filled with bugs and being unplayable and just being an unfun mess. And that is, I'm really concerned they might try to do some type of Sephiroth redemption story. Be it either us seeing a younger version of him or some alternate timeline version that we have seen in the first Soldier. There's a trope that's found throughout literature in some stories where a past version of a character will see the monster they become in the future and then start to rebel against them, kind of becoming a protagonist. This can end up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes, as the good character will eventually just become the bad guy anyways, but I think either way, if they do it, it's just still going to be bad. And this concern mostly just comes because they have a lot of assets for young Sephiroth now from the first Soldier, and they're really adding a lot to Sephiroth's gameplay in the flashbacks that we've seen so far in the demo, and it's just kind of making me concerned of why they would put so much time, art, and assets behind something like this. this. I'm really just hoping it's because they wanted to give fans a chance to play as Sephiroth, because that's something people have asked for a while, and I'm really hoping it just isn't them trying to roll in the idea of him having a redemption story arc, where he rebels against Jenova instead of giving in. Because overall, I feel like this would just ruin the character of Sephiroth as a whole, and just really totally stain his legacy as being one of the best villains. But yeah, ultimately that's kind of where my head's at for Rebirth right now, and I'm sure we're going to get a new trailer in the Game Awards come mid-December, and maybe I'll do a reaction video to that trailer if it does come out, or if there's a really big crazy reveal, maybe I'll do an updated theory or something. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what your worries and concerns are for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and what kind of questions you might have around it. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Later, nerds.
Nothing shall forestall my return.